Hello guys, this is Jack, and today we're going to be doing a review for Josephine. I just saw this at the Sundance Film Festival, the virtual component of the Sundance Film Festival, and it's one of those films that has been talked about over the past couple of days since now it did win the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. And I was able to catch it virtually just a few days ago, and I kind of want to share my thoughts about it, specifically the plot and also where it's going to head towards this award season that's coming up next year. So let's kind of dive into the movie. So starting from the beginning, you have this young girl played by Mason Reeves. I think this is her first role. And basically you're following this young girl who sees a sexual assault happen in the forest, and it opens with this really brutal scene, and it goes on for a little bit, and then eventually Channing Tatum, who plays the father of the young girl, finds out about the assault and takes the girl away from the situation. And from there, you're basically trying to unwind the assault and why it happened and how it happened. And basically, through the entire film, you're following this girl who is kind of traumatized. And the film is basically shot in a way where you're seeing the perspective of this young girl who's going through a lot of things in her life. And it starts out pretty intense with the assault, but then eventually it turns strangely into a very dark, depressing, and also kind of horrific story with this young girl. And right from the beginning, I was really riveted by the direction of this film. This is the same director who did Soft and Quiet, which was a film that was also very abrasive with its subject and was really kind of a film that really kind of bothered me because of its subject, but also the way how it was portraying those certain set of characters that were going through a lot with the political landscape of the late 2020s. But with this film, it's more kind of a triumph as far as stepping up the directorial game this director has done. Beth D'Arijo, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, she steps up her game as far as her directorial standards, and throughout this entire film, you're seeing Mason Reeves go through a lot of these really intense moments in her life. And what I really liked also about the film was it never shied away from any of the depressing moments of this child's life. So when you do get to the parts where she is trying to unpack what just happened to the victim of the assault, she tries to Google the word on the mother's phone, who's played by Gemma Chan, a few scenes later in the film, and then that whole unraveling of that word starts to really set in once she tries to say it out loud on the playground. And eventually she has the battle between the little boys in her class and the juxtaposition of Channing Tatum's character, who is trying to teach the daughter how to defend herself through self-defense classes, instead of unpacking everything that just happened psychologically through therapeutic classes. And Gemma Chan's character is trying to do that, trying to act out in a feminine way by kind of talking it out with the young girl, but Channing Tatum's character is doing the masculine trait as he's trying to teach the girl how to defend herself through fighting. And those two things clash in between in the film, and eventually it spirals out of control near its third act of the film, which pretty much is all about how the girl is going to set to go on trial to kind of explain what happened around that time of the assault, as she's the only person who saw the assault. The victim is traumatized and can't fully explain what happened to her, so instead the young girl has to kind of unpack all of that in the courtroom, and it is played up for intensity and horror. And despite some of my flaws with the film, especially coming from some of the characters, especially the parents who are going about with the situation, there's some moments where you kind of question whether or not these parents are justified in what they're trying to say to this young child. Especially Channing Tatum's character, who, again, he's trying to teach the kid how to defend themselves physically, but is very dismissive of the idea of therapy and just uses the way of like, oh, like we can, go to self-defense classes instead of going to therapy. And I think that was the wrong choice that happened in the film, because some of the stuff that the young girl goes through, you kind of question about, oh, she really needs to like go to therapy and really need to like unpack everything. You don't really get a moment where the young girl is sitting with a therapist and really kind of like talking it out professionally, and that kind of ruffled my jimmies a little bit. But even then, when it does get to the final sequence in the film with the courtroom drama, that's where the film finally closes in and you really start to understand what happened to all of these characters that were going through like the situation. And there's a very like innovative cinematography in this, especially with the opening scene with the girl and the father jogging in the forest and then eventually losing themselves in these two paths, and then eventually the assault. And then also there's a really kind of crazy moment where the girl is sitting with the lawyer and the parents, and they're all at the dinner table trying to figure out whether or not the girl should testify for the stuff that she saw. And the camera basically spins around the dinner table while you kind of see like glimpses of the rapist kind of like playing around with like the backgrounds of the dinner table and the living room. And there is actually moments where you see the actor who plays the rapist kind of like go in and out of the narrative, especially since the whole film is entirely shot in the child's perspective. So it is playing around with the imagination of a young child who goes through this really dark, depressing, traumatic moment in their lives, and now this whole manifestation of this rapist going in and out of the character's dreams and reality basically ruins the girl's aspirations in life currently in the film. And sure, like, it is kind of like tiptoeing between provoking, upsetting, and also kind of like playing it slightly safe with the baseline of trauma when it comes to these types of stuff. But even then, when you're watching the film, you do actually start to question all the stuff that is happening in the film. You start to question all the characters and their motivations, and it's basically a conversation starter. When you do reach to the end of the film, you start to kind of unpack what happened to all the characters in the film, and you really try to understand how this would actually kind of like work in the real world. But yeah, man, this was really, really great. Despite some of the flaws that I do have with like the character motivations and some of the direction in this, I still think it is a step above from her last film, Soft and Quiet. And I also do think the performances are really great. Channing Tatum gives another great performance in his filmography. I really loved him in Roofman last year, and this is another performance where he's showing a lot of range. Gemma Chan also shows a lot of range in this, despite her character being more of like a platitudinal character in terms of just like showing, moments of like therapy to the young child. But that's basically it for her character. You only get glimpses of Channing and Gemma fighting, or either kind of like contemplating about whether or not to let the child testify in court. You don't really get to see the softer moments of these two characters. Mason Reeves, who plays the young girl in this film, is exceptional. She gives the best young performance so far this year that I've seen, and she just really commits to the bit. And I was just shocked and surprised by how she felt like very tough in like this role, despite everything happening to her and to her character. But yeah, this one was really, really great. I recommend it. It is kind of like a triggering film, and if you're not like really prepared for what's going to happen to all these characters, then I don't recommend you watching this film. But it is one of those films that is really needed in our times right now, and I think it's definitely an important film. So yeah, I give this a 4 out of 5. As far as Oscar awards like potential, I think it's going to sweep up like the Indie Spirits next year. It's definitely a good film to kind of nominate that in motion, but I don't know if it will definitely be a part of like this award season that's coming up next year. The only thing that I think really needs to be addressed is who's going to pick the film up. If Bleecker Street, Vertical, or Black Bear or even like Briarcliff takes the distribution rights for this film, then it's a lost cause because those distributors aren't really good with handling small films in a small scale with a small budget. But I think if like Sony Pictures Classics or Netflix or the new Warner Brothers indie label that is erupting right now with the new management that they have, I think it's coming from like the old Neon management that's taking over the new Warner Brothers indie label. If they take this film, then I could definitely see it being a part of the conversation. It just really depends on whether or not which like distributor is going to take the film. Also, you have to kind of like take into account that this is probably like the third like American film that won the Grand Jury Dramatic Prize at Sundance. The last two were Minari and Coda, and those actually went off to the Oscars. And I think if, again, somebody takes it who's a really good distributor, it could actually continue that trend. But yeah, like that's basically it. I don't really have anything too much to say about this film. Definitely check it out when it does come out in theaters later this year. If you are kind of like in the middle of the Sundance virtual program right now, you can check it out as I'm recording this video. But by the time I post it, it's basically over. So thank you guys so much. I might do some more Sundance reviews, but I gotta like think about that. If not, then I'll probably just condense it into one video as like a wrap-up video. But keep an eye out for more reviews. I will be doing more awards predictions later into the season as we wrap up the Oscar season. And yeah, just like, subscribe, share, do whatever you can to share this video out. Thank you guys. Peace out.